busted. The Victorian Government, Australia's worst government, busted, absolutely busted, telling a complete beat up about this beast of a new virus strain. A beat up that its chief health officer later admitted he had really no evidence for. A disgraceful beat up to justify the Victorian Government's decision today to make 5 million people, make the people of Melbourne now spend another week in lockdown. What kind of shameless scaremongers, what kind of incompetents are running Victoria, running it into the ground? Here's the acting Premier today.
A variant of the virus that is quicker and more contagious than we have ever seen before. It's why, on the advice of the Chief Health Officer, Professor Sutton, the current restrictions remain in place for Melbourne for a further 7 days with some small changes.
Quicker, more infectious than ever seen before. In fact, demonic.
I have described it as an absolute beast because we have to run it down to the ground.
So it's a beast now, a strain never seen before, that same Chief Health Officer said yesterday. A virus that's moved faster than any other strain we've dealt with. And we're seeing transmissions in settings and circumstances we've never seen before. And Victoria's head of virus testing today joined this extraordinary beat-up.
What we're seeing now clearly is people who are, they're brushing past each other in a small shop. This is relatively fleeting contact. They don't know each other's names. And that's very different from where we've been before.
Oh, and the media fell for this spin. They ran so hard last night with this story of some Frankenstein virus stalking the land, ran it to soften up the public, to terrify them into accepting a lockdown of the kind that would never be done like this in New South Wales.
Victoria's battle with COVID is entering a dangerous new phase, with the virus spreading in ways we've never seen before.
Perfectly done. You've got to give them some credit here. I mean, that is how you convince people to accept yet more lockdowns for an authoritarian government that's already locked up Melbourne for 140 days. Every other state, the average lockdown is 6 days. Victoria, 140. Now, just in case you were thinking, well, I better go and nail my door shut and make my last will and testament with this beast of a virus on the loose, let me check this claim now from this Victorian government, that this new variant of the Indian strain of the virus is infecting people in a very different way, not seen before. People infected in a fleeting moment by just brushing past each other in a small shop. Hello, that's not new at all. That's exactly the main way that this virus has infected people from the very start. Professor Peter Collignon, an infectious diseases expert from the Australian National University, he's not buying this. He said it here, he said it again on Peter Credlin's show tonight. He's seen no evidence that this strain is really behaving differently. Professor Kimberly Prather says the same. She's a distinguished professor in atmospheric chemistry at the University of California. She can't believe the Victorian government's excuses that this virus variant infects us any differently to the other variants.
It was a bit baffling to hear it. I mean, the commonality that is there now was there before, which is all of those incidents that he described are people sharing the air indoors. And, they kind of make it sound like, well, they just passed by each other. But if they were indoors with an infectious person breathing the air, then that's how they're getting infected. This virus is airborne.
You heard it. This virus has always been spread predominantly by breathing in air infected by a sick person, and almost always indoors. Now, I know that the hopeless World Health Organization used to say the very opposite. I mean, a year ago, it even tweeted, fact, COVID-19 is not airborne. The virus is mainly transmitted through droplets generated when an infected person coughs, sneezes, or speaks. It claimed you couldn't get sick simply by breathing in infected air, breathing in those tiny aerosols. They had to be droplets. And that's why we were told, keep a metre distance from other people, a sneeze away. and, wipe down surfaces where these droplets might have fallen. But how often has the World Health Organization been wrong now? And it was wrong again. Professor Prather, the woman you just heard, she and other colleagues in April wrote an article in the medical journal Lancet, which listed 10 reasons why the World Health Organization was wrong again. 10 streams of evidence, they said, showed that this virus was actually transmitted primarily by the airborne route. Now look at the second reason they gave. That we saw, they said, long-range transmission of this virus between people in adjacent rooms, but never in each other's presence, in quarantine hotels. How often have we seen exactly that right here in Australia? In April, for instance, 2 people staying in a Perth quarantine hotel got the British strain of this virus from returned travellers in another room. They apparently just breathe the same air. And now we learn that another person in a Perth quarantine hotel has caught the virus too from a traveller in Colombia in another room, sharing the air of a hotel that the West Australian Government was warned had inadequate ventilation, had an amber alert. And then there's this Melbourne outbreak. Exactly the same thing. Once again, that was caused by a traveller in a quarantine hotel, this time in Adelaide, who opened the door of his room and just breathed in the air in the corridor. Seconds after, infected people down the corridor opened their door and breathed out. Now that time it was the Indian variant that's now infected 60 Victorians. But what in that last example is new is the evidence that this virus strain is an absolute beast that spreads in a very different way from the other examples. What justifies not trusting contact tracers to handle this outbreak, as New South Wales does, especially now when the vast majority of the people most likely to be killed by a virus, people in aged care, have had at least one injection of a vaccine? Now, this fear-mongering by the Victorian Government is obscene. Professor Gregory Dorr, he doesn't get it either. He's another infectious diseases expert, this one from the University of New South Wales, and he's tweeted that he gets the concern in Victoria, but this stranger danger messaging from the government is not helping. He says the virus is always transmitted from person to person efficiently in certain settings, whether friend to friend, family member to family member, or stranger to stranger. Now here is the punchline. When he was pushed today on this excuse by Sky News reporter Julia Bradley, doing a great job, Victoria's Chief Health Officer admitted he actually had no data to back up his claim that this beast of a variant was being transmitted differently.
You're saying right now that you're seeing evidence of transmission that you didn't see during Victoria's second wave. Couldn't that be down to improvements with contact tracing, which is providing better mapping of how the virus is moving around the state this time around?
We still need to have a lockdown to minimise the number of people who'll be in those settings. That's a key feature of extending this by a week. So it's not that all transmissions are occurring in casual settings, it's just to illustrate that the contagiousness of this virus is not insubstantial.
That type of transmission could have been happening during the second wave. We just don't know about it.
Yeah, it could have been transmitting during the second wave. It probably was. I don't think it was happening to that extent.
Can you believe that? How extraordinary. This Victorian government is vastly exaggerating the danger of this variant. It's spreading fear to hide the fact that it still cannot control an outbreak properly with contact tracers and to excuse another devastating lockdown. And its chief health officer admits he cannot prove the wild claims he's making. We may actually have seen this all before. Seems to me he's just making stuff up. How on earth are these people in charge?